Okay, so today we're talking about AI in education, and just like we focused, the first meetup that we did, we had a few guests from Alpha School and the founder of the Gauntlet program to discuss like education from the sort of like teacher perspective at new and innovative schools, private. The second month, some of the students from that the Gauntlet program came and talked more about that because people were really interested in that the first month. But now, the third month, we have folks that are interested in the public sector. So with us today, starting on my left, we have Suzanne Newell, Dr. Newell, who's been an education leader specializing in curriculum development, K-12, 3 years. Laura Wilk, who's actually a Capital Factory member, fellow Capital Factory member, has had some edutech startups and is currently with currently advising districts on integration and change management. And on the other side, the far side, we have Michael Peter, who's a managing director at 66 Degrees, which is an AI implementation consultancy group. So lots of varied expertise here. What we'll do is we have a few prompts for our panelists. Each of them will get to respond to those. Maybe we'll be able to get some like good discussion back and forth during each of those sections. And then the last bit of the talk will have Q&A time for the rest of y'all. So before we do that though, I just want to get like a showing of hands for the folks in the audience. How many of you here would you say are coming to this from the education side of things and are interested in the tech? Okay, we got a few. And then how many are coming kind of from the tech side and interested in like education? And does anybody see none of the above? Okay, cool, yeah, okay, so a lot of tech, some education people. I think this will be really informative for y'all, and we can kind of tailor that in your guys' answers. So, without further ado, let's get into the first prompt for our panelists. So the first one's this idea, when calculators arrived, we didn't stop teaching math, it just changed how we actually went about it. We needed to raise the bar for higher order problem solving. This is probably a really strong parallel in a lot of people's minds for what's going on with AI now. How do we apply like the calculator model of adapting curriculum to the rest of all the subjects in an AI context, now that we have LLMs, now that we have the technology that we do today, in order to get things like critical cognitive skills, critical analysis, and original reasoning, rather than just type, give me the answer, and so on. So who would like to start it off? Suzanne?
Hi, everybody. Hello. There we are. Hi, you guys. So a little bit of my background that might inform the way I answer the question. I was a first grade teacher, and then I spent the bulk of my career in curriculum design and development for both smaller suburban districts and then most recently in Austin ISD up until about 3 years ago. And one of the things, interestingly enough, I left Austin ISD, so I left public school leadership about 8 months before the release of ChatGPT, right? So I have, I led through COVID, which is like one baptism by fire in public school leadership, but I have not led in public schools during the era of AI. And I often talk with my colleagues who are still working in the field about what curriculum development looks like now that we used to do tediously by hand, writing exemplar lessons and making sure that they met a certain level of rigor and they were aligned with the state standards and matched to the curriculum and whatnot, versus what all of that now can be automated in a matter of seconds, assuming that the output is high quality. And so that's sort of where my head is in terms of pre-AI or pre-gen AI is probably a more accurate way to put it versus post. And I think the calculator analogy is spot on, right? And if you look back historically in the 70s when calculators started to become very prolific, teachers freaked out. They absolutely freaked out because students weren't going to have the core skill of doing all of that work by hand. And what it turned out to do is it, in a way, democratized math, right? It automated something that was really hard for a lot of kids, and it leveled that playing field in such a way that wasn't a bar that kids had to reach in order to do more sophisticated calculations. And so my hope for generative AI is, and I've heard the term democratization of education in circles as we talk about AI, that it's going to do that for us as well. I have like the happy GPT angel on one shoulder and the it's going to destroy the world angel on the other shoulder. So I know that there are lots of currently nefarious and very unproductive uses of AI right now, and I think that's largely because we haven't built in any amount of systematized AI literacy into what teachers know how to use, into what teachers know, into what students know about both how AI works and ways to partner for better outputs with it. Right now it's just in that supplant mode. Like, I'm going to put this in, it's going to give me an answer, and my evening social activity just got enhanced because I don't have to sit for 4 hours studying something hard, right? And so my biggest hope, I mean, I think number one, that analogy is great, but it's only going to be great if we learn to build upon what it gives us. There's my first stab
Nice,
at that.
yeah. We can hand it off.
Thank you. Hi everyone, I'm Laura Wilk, and to give you a little bit about me, I have my passion is special education and the support for students with disabilities and creating really cool learning experiences for them that are inclusive and rich and rigorous. And so I've been at pretty much every level of special education, including working for Texas Education Agency, really thinking about that experience for all of our students, okay, including kids with disabilities. So when we think about that calculator analogy, much like Dr. Newell was saying, right, it can be a playing field leveler, right? It can give kids who need that extra boost, that computing power that they can launch from, and now they can do some higher order thinking because that cognitive load is reduced, right? I think the difference, I've been thinking about this ever since we kind of thought through these prompts, is what's the difference now between AI and the calculator? What's the difference? Well, AI is a thinking partner, or the calculator is a tool to do computation, right? And when you think of it in that way, it's so exciting to think about now what's that jumping pad that our kids have, all of our kids, but even more importantly for me, our kids with challenges, like what doors does that open for them in their learning? How does that help them to achieve higher order thinking skills that we know that they can do? And then what's the evidence of their learning that we're now going to get? It's not about completion, it's about true mastery of skills, right? And so the other thing that's exciting about this, calculators were probably when they first started really expensive and only certain kids could have them, right? But that technology over time became less expensive and more kids could have them too, and people, adults, everybody, right? And everybody's starting to use them. So I'm just really optimistic about the power of AI and doing good. I know, like you said, it can also be quite nefarious and people use it to cheat. But there's so much more to it. And that leads me to pass this off to Mike, who is the genius about all that.
I don't know about that. Let me know if my voice starts to go. All day. So, Michael Peter.
Just make sure to hold it close
To my face.
close to the
Hey,
mouth,
look at that. That
ranges.
does make a huge difference. I'll try not to spit on the microphone. So, Michael Peter, Managing Director at 66 Degrees. So, for the context of some of my comments, so I've been at 66 Degrees for about 2 months. Before that, I was at Google for almost 7 years as a principal architect. And I'll say the journey that everyone is kind of going through right now, Google always leans in. So Google went through how do we use AI in everything that we do? 3 years ago. So it touches, and this is I think the point of this, it touches every single thing that you do. And I think part of the way that people struggle about how to use AI is because they're trying to pick the 1 or 2 or 3 things that it's gonna touch and figure out how it affects that process. And then when you start to think about that, you think about all the other ways that it could touch that process and adjacent process, and the fact that it's involved in every step along the way. And then it becomes a little bit overwhelming. And we just have to kind of tackle that up front and then understand the real purpose of this or any tool is what's the outcome that we want to produce. For some students and learners, it's going to be, how do I write my paper in an hour because I waited till the last minute and it's 3 o'clock in the morning. And there's a certain level of outcome that they're going to get, right? Or it could be, I'm going to do a ton of research up front and I'm going to have it critique my draft and going to help me find my weak spots and level up what I'm doing because they have a different focus and outcome. So it's really self-directed. I think the part that starts to unlock is considering that it will and should touch everything. And like when I left Google 2 months ago, there's not an operating part inside that isn't driven by AI. We're talking to our fellow engineers, we're talking to customers, we're talking about what the customer said and figuring out what they said, how do we position products, how do we think about those things that fit together. It's both technical, it's social, it's emotional, it's every part of that, and the whole purpose is to accelerate the outcome, number one, and not miss something that would cause us to not take advantage of the opportunities that we could to get to that good outcome. I think the same thing is going to be true here. It's early days, and I think there's not a consensus on where people need to focus, which means if we're all pulling on oars in a different direction, the boat is just going to be sitting there or spinning around or something like that. So I think, to your point, we need to get together and talk about and we talked about this with customers, what are the first set of baby steps that put you in the best direction, that start to level people up, and doing so in a coordinated way so that you start to look at what is the outcome that you want to produce and then work your way back from there.
All right, so I'm gonna throw you not a entire, but a very slight curveball for question 2, just to tie it to actually the discussion that you guys brought out in question 1. So the second thing I wanted to talk about was kind of on the like positive praxis side. So it seems like we're all fans of this calculator hypothesis here. There's a question of like, does one put that into practice? And putting that in the terms that you were talking about, in terms of the calculator hypothesis, in my mind, one of the reasons why that had this like democratizing effect on the material being taught at the point is probably because of, in that case, right, working memory, which is like the one like gap where like if you have more working memory slots, you can like do more, hold more of those computations in your head when doing the more advanced stuff. And in fact, when people are struggling at advanced levels, them not knowing their math facts to like completion like earlier is like often like the diagnosed cause of that. So the calculator helps alleviate some of that, right? What do you see as those similar things that like AI like solves for a struggling student or one that's doing well? And do you think that answer is different for students with disabilities versus not, and so on? Yeah.
That's a good question. There's a lot to that question. I think that for it's for all students really. It's the ability to organize your thoughts and show evidence of what you're learning in a new and novel way. So that speaks to personalized learning, right? And so, Mark and I, my husband, we talk a lot about education in our house, right? And one of the things that we talk about is that every single student could have an individualized education program. So that's the great big document that any child with a disability who has special education services has. It defines their entire educational program. But it's really kind of cool. What if every single learner who walks through the door, they are a mixed bag of strengths and weaknesses, right? Things they're working on and things they're really good at. And everybody could benefit from that kind of a plan or a program. AI can make that happen at scale. And so now it's not so much about special education or gifted and talented education, right? Which is a whole nother conversation about, kids or twice exceptional kids, right? Now it's about meeting every single learner where they are and accelerating them to where the next step, right? We talked about building step by step by step, right? And so that's really exciting, right? We try and do that. We work on that in public education and private ed. Everybody's working towards that goal, but I'm not sure that anybody's actually hit that spot where we are able to personalize learning for all kids.
You just gave me an idea. All right. So I left public education support in 2022 and have had a couple of different stints in technology companies. The one that I work for now, that's my day job, I have a day job and a play job, and I can explain that later if you care. But at my day job, we have a subscription to Copilot. Right? Everybody has their own Copilot, and we have gone through a pretty robust onboarding of what that means for us as employees, so that we're getting our money's worth out of it. Sorry, my Google friend down there. I'm very Gemini friendly too, so all told. But so especially because I do a lot of the training within my company now, and I'm really keen on certain employees who have really maximized their Copilot usage. They've uploaded their Clifton Strengths profile. They've uploaded their job description. They've uploaded the types of ways they want their Copilot to nudge and converse and play point counterpoint with them. And so they are getting a more personalized learning experience, albeit through the lens of a corporate job description, than the average user who's using it to draft their angry but not sounding angry emails, right? And so what if we can take that experience, and I'm sure there are good teachers already doing this, but I don't know that, at least I haven't been talking about this in the spaces with school leaders, is we already have the opportunity to personalize our education with the tools if districts have subscription-based tools for those personalized sort of walled garden experiences they can have. And so how can that be amplified so that people even know that that's possible? And really probably the biggest, and I'm going to lay my card on the table for one of the other prompts we have later, but my biggest concern related to AI in education is the vast gap between those who know and those who don't know much of anything about it. Like what training has been afforded to the professionals in the field and the students that are served by those professionals. It is such a vast gap. And the fact that that's not systematized anywhere, I think is going to continue to hinder efforts like this personalized education work that is possible now technologically for little or no cost, but we just don't have the upskilling yet to capitalize on it. Multiple soapboxes in that very complex.
Yeah. Do you have comments from Michael?
Yeah, just a quick comment on that. I think if you're thinking through how you learn, right, there's several things that you need. You need a place to source the material from. What are you going to learn in the first place? How do you define the learning plan or the training plan? How do you implement that and track progress over time? And how do you understand the learning modalities of the student to make sure it's not a generic thing? It's the difference between, 10-on-1 or 1-on-10 training and 1-on-1 training. If you've ever had 1-on-1 training, that's a complete level difference. Now, what if you had that 1-on-1 training 24/7 or 18/7, depending on how much you sleep and work? Right, so this is what that starts to unlock for us, especially from a behavioral perspective, and not behavioral in terms of special education, but behavioral in terms of how do I like to ingest my information? How do I like to learn things? How do I like to be tested? If I am having a very difficult learning experience, how do I keep on track? And then how do I continue that journey? And so to the point of, AI can be used to write a paper for you, that's great. There's a certain, like I said before, there's a certain outcome that's going to create, but that's also a limiter to the person who's doing that. Whereas if you're looking at it from the journey of how can this push me, and I'll use a good example. I was talking to the CEO of a local bank, and she related that she goes, every morning I check in with Gemini, and that helps me prep for my day. And I'm like, oh, she's checking her calendar, she's summarizing her email. That's not what she's doing. She goes, here's the top things that I have to think about in my role, and Gemini interrogates me on how I'm going to answer questions, respond to that, and think critically about what we're going to do. It doesn't give her any answers. It asks her all the hard questions, so that by the time she shows up to work, whatever's on her calendar, whoever she's meeting, she's already been through that in her head. That's a completely different way to think about that. Right, that's a game changer. If you think about, and this shouldn't be revealed, if you think about Google and Microsoft and OpenAI and other service providers of a foundational model perspective, they're all racing towards one thing, which is they want to develop the ubiquitous assistant that's always by your side, that you love, that you can't do without, that is ever present, vastly knowledged, and guides you in every step and action that you take, including your learning journey. So we're probably somewhere between, Gemini 3 is coming out October 9th, but we're probably 3 years, I think, at most from something like that. There's already been a couple of companies that have taken a swing at that kind of thing. To the point of how you prepare for that, there is a definite need to think about if a child has a phone, that phone has this thing on it. That phone can guide their learning journey. How do we make sure that it's guiding it in a way that's structured and is achieving the outcomes that we want versus otherwise, right? Because it's going to be very tailored, very personalized. There's got to be a set of guidelines put down for how that assists a child or anyone in their learning journey.
Awesome. Yeah, so I hear a bunch of similar through lines in your guys' answer to what gap is filled by the AI, similar to what the calculator did. Like with regards to thought partners, we mentioned multiple times, one-on-one coaching every day, etc. From which I gather, all three of you must use AI yourselves. So being that you guys are, in Dr. Newell's words, those in the know, the next question is, in terms of the skills in AI literacy that a student would need to learn or be instructed on, what are your we want the top tips for a teacher doing AI literacy for students so that they can actually get that benefit as opposed to the outcome of write me an essay. Here you go.
All right. So, and I actually pulled my phone up because I was going to share an example, but I have a cheat sheet of some of the AI literacy factors that I've woven into the training that I do for school leaders. And so it's all over the map, but helping them understand what a large language model is, helping them understand what generative pre-trained transformer means, right? GPT, all of a sudden they're like, oh, that means something, right? Oh, yes, it does. And that can help you understand what's happening beneath the surface of AI capabilities. Helping them be literate around hallucinations. Helping them understand that bias, are humans biased? Yes. Who made AI? Humans. Is AI biased? Yes. Right? There's no way to escape that, but a lot of people, and I think especially students, have to be trained to be bias detectors within it, like a little scavenger hunt. I found the need for literacy around, and this is going to sound a little silly and kind of basic to people who speak tech, but a lot of people who haven't been kind of swimming in technology waters don't understand the difference between ChatGPT and Magic School, or one of the tools that are specifically germane to education. They don't understand that those are basically riding the coattails of a very large language model, right? They don't understand the differences. So I help them understand that there are major players, right? There's OpenAI, there's Google, right, and so on. So that they can sort of begin to mentally map what the AI landscape looks like. And maybe that's just the way I think, but I think that's important for them. And And then particularly, especially as it relates to the field of public education, there is an important AI literacy piece around personally identifiable information, terms and conditions, what sort of guardrails and policies are in place or need to be in place, what questions to ask before they upload a document into this system. Is it private? Is it not? Or could it be, what laws have I broken already by accident? Those sorts of things. What would y'all add to that?
I think that's phenomenal. So for me, I'm always the kid-centric person, so I always think about, like, what do our kids know? What are they walking into school already knowing? So I worked for 3 years as a teacher in a project-based learning academy. It's a STEAM academy. This is pre-GPT, but it was pretty awesome. And I learned so much from my kids. Okay, so like they knew about Raspberry Pi, they knew about Discord, they were into all of these things that the facilitators who were facilitating these really cool learning experiences for them, they didn't know, right? They came in knowing more than we did. What really excites me about the prompt literacy and the things that our students need to know is how early we can start that kind of thinking. So I didn't grow up learning math as like learning algebraic thinking in kindergarten. That wasn't part of what I grew up with, right? But my daughters did. They, in kindergarten, I could see, when I go visit, they were already talking in algebraic language. They're much better at math than I am. So I think that we need to start embedding, which is going to rely on what you're talking about for our teachers and our leaders in schools, is early language development that's going to prepare our children with the knowledge, the base knowledge they need to be very savvy in understanding AI.
Those are all really good, Dr. Newell. That's a fantastic list. Some of those things I'm actually going to borrow if I can, in terms of like how to talk to people about what they need, because it is true. Security is super important. Just understanding what the landscape looks like and super important are the things that you need to watch. All of that basics in terms of just understanding the space and the trajectory of the space are really important. You can do so in accessible ways. I would say for anyone who's using the technology, and this is kind of, I went through the Texas educational system. One of the biggest things that I noticed as an adult is schools try to teach you. Schools don't teach you to learn how to learn. They're just throwing information at you. And the technology today unlocks that learning potential that if you don't know how to structure your journey, how do you then use it to inform yourself? And I think that's one of the most critical things is, I would use just because of my background as an engineer, I would approach it from a scientific method perspective, but there's all sorts of things like Bloom's taxonomy, et cetera. What's the learning framework that you need? And then you apply the model inside of that thing so that you can get to the outcome that you want. And I think this is true for teachers. I think this is true for students. I think this is, everyone should be sort of a lifelong student. That's a personal belief. How do you leverage that to accelerate your outcome in that perspective? I think the other thing that's just from knowledge acquisition, how to use it in an effective way. I think from a teacher perspective, you've got students who have access to this tool that's either an accelerator or it can be somewhat insidious, meaning they can undercut their educational journey. I think using the tools to understand how those tools might be used to shortcut the journey and then coming up with plans that short-circuit that. So where are the areas where a student was allowed to use the model, and then how can I structure a learning path that somehow excludes the potential in certain situations to use the model and does other things to reinforce the learning cycle would be important. What that looks like, I don't know, but I think, to the calculator analogy, you have to take this test. You can't use calculators. You have to take the test. You can use calculators because the real test, the thing that you're being tested on isn't math, for example. Or, one of the big things today is small language models that are trained on a specific thing, so it can help you accelerate one specific part. but that part is part of an overarching, I'm being tested on essay writing, I'm being tested on, you know, thought formulation, and I can use a smaller model that can't necessarily get me there, but it can get me elements of the way. It's going to be important. So I think there's whole new teaching strategies across the board that need to be unlocked, and then I think from like a person by person, student by student example, one of the first things, you know, after Dr. Newell's list and Laura's comments is come up with a framework to teach, you know, someone who's 3, who's 4, who's 5, how to think about how they structure their journey. They're already asking a ton of questions. How do you help them think things through step by step to make sure that question gets to an outcome?
Awesome.
There's one thing on my list that I forgot to say, and it's probably, in some people's minds, the most important part of AI literacy, and that is prompt engineering. Right? I know that that was a field for a while, and now it's like almost passé because AI is becoming its own prompt engineer. But I would say that the instructional nugget in that is coaching kids to ask better questions, because that's what's going to feed that, like, learn how to learn thing. So.
Awesome. Love the tips. I think that those are all really good, super applicable, certainly for all of the lifelong learners that we have in the audience that are adults, maybe even at like the high school level too. With kind of like K to 8, one thing that I think of when having these types of conversations is like the like marshmallow experiment. People are familiar with that, where they have the kid marshmallow in front of them, aren't supposed to eat it, test like various factors, like what actually stops them from doing the easy thing, like eat the marshmallow now. So we talked about AI literacy on the, we talked about the teacher perspective on the AI literacy side. How do you change what you're doing in the classroom when you're delivering content about AI? There is another side of like actually setting up guardrails so that, like Michael was just saying, they're like not necessarily able to like always like click like the like do it for me button. What would you recommend to like educators, like how to think, what things should they be thinking with on that front when structuring where AI is inserted, as opposed to the AI literacy itself?
One of the things that I'm seeing happen a lot is, and I'm not saying that I'm supporting this, but I'm citing it as an example. Many of you in this room, and I'm not generalizing age-wise, but might have gone through school and you had to fill out a blue book, right, in order to answer a question or essay or whatever, right? And the point of a blue book back in the day was, it's not an open book test. Basically, you're just going to hand me this piece of paper that is all the evidence of what you know based on what you can write in this setting. And because of the all of the kind of cheat mechanisms that are possible with computers now, a lot of teachers are saying, put it all away, I want to see what's in your brain. Dump it out and let's see that. There's a little bit of that I can get behind, because I think it is important for kids to have some content knowledge that is theirs without a computer nearby, right? We don't want to be a citizenry of people that don't have certain things ingrained into us. Now, whether or not regurgitating that onto a blue book is the right way to go about that, that's a conversation pedagogically for another day. But I think that there's a saying that I've used a lot in the field of education, and that is, don't waste a good crisis. And back in 2000, when the internet became what the internet has become, or was becoming at that point, we all said, you know, if you can Google it, it shouldn't be in your curriculum. It shouldn't be on the test, right? We wanted to work towards deeper thinking and promoting critical thinking with kids. And that really hasn't manifested into a lot of changes in instructional practice, right? And so I'm hoping that Gen AI is going to be the next crisis we shouldn't waste that really will, and I think it will, transform what happens in teaching and learning. So the example that I found in an assignment I was looking at the other day is, instead of asking, giving an assignment in a, let's just say, a high school civics class that has very cut and dried answers that are Googleable, what if we assigned things like this? Design a sustainable water solution for a specific desert region with a $1 million budget and 5 local political conditions, specified as below. Boom. That is a completely different kind of assignment than name the 5 desert regions of such and such a country, right? That is all Googleable and frankly somewhat irrelevant to any meaningful purpose. And so that's the kind of thing I'm hoping happens, is a more like problem-based approach to everything. The challenge with that is that it doesn't fit neatly into the state curriculum, like grade by grade, 6 weeks by 6 weeks period. And so orchestrating that meaningfully in the classroom is challenging, to say the least.
I love that. That's actually what we did at the academy. It was extremely difficult. It's cool in theory, but we lived making the theory reality, and we learned a lot through that process. Like I said, though, that was before AI. And I love your example, and I think it's the way, well, it's, in my opinion, it's the way we should be going, because our kids have to solve big problems, right? They just do. We're not leaving them with the best situation. And so making sure that they're able to work together, to use critical thinking, to use tools to help them do higher order thinking and problem solving is going to be crucial to them, you know? I think reflecting on their learning, so at the end of a learning pathway, whatever that is, to have students provide an authentic reflection of what they've learned in their own words, maybe through a blue book, would be a way that I might assess their learning and see where I might need to reteach or ask some other questions for them. But when I'm thinking about a learning experience and where to add in AI, I use a planning framework. So I always start with the end in mind. Like, what do I want them to know? That's important because I need to know what I'm assessing, right? Because I don't want to use AI on the things that I'm assessing. So what do I want them to know? How will I know when they've learned it? Right? And that tells me a lot, right? And then what am I going to do if they don't learn it yet? They haven't learned it yet. What am I going to do? What am I going to do if they already know it? Okay? And then how am I going to use my resources to make this a better learning experience? So if that's the framework that you use, then it becomes a lot easier to see where do I want my students to utilize AI and where do I want them not to, right? And how do I build that experience around it that's so engaging that they don't want to cheat, right? So I have to really be intentional and really think about what is the question that's going to pique their interest the most, because our kids spend all of their time in the things they're really interested in, right? The things they're trying to offload with ChatGPT, you know what that tells me? I didn't ask them the right question. I didn't build the right learning experience. It was so irrelevant to them that they just wanted to have something to turn in. They wanted to just complete it. Well, that's not a learning experience, right? So as a teacher, I need to go back and reflect myself and maybe do some redesign.
And then working backwards from, it sounds like the test to pass on the one hand and the student motivation on the other. Yeah.
Yeah, and I love the answer. I love both the sort of the how do you pose a problem that Dr. Neal talked about, and then the working backward from the outcome, and how do you avoid the landmines of, you know, I can just go Google this, or I can just go ask, you know, a large language model, here's the answer for it, and I'm done. I can go play Minecraft or whatever now. So I think that's going to be important. It's a tough question because there is something that's getting closer to approximating human intellect that someone has that they can turn to, right? If I have a question about education, you know, I could ask, and suddenly I can give you the answer because I asked. How do we make sure that you're not offloading being able to answer a question, or not offloading your knowledge? And to some extent, you know, we do, right? I don't know a single phone number of my friends these days, although prior to 2000 I did. right? Now I just know where, so there are some things that we're offloading already. I'll raise this as a thought experiment. What happens when we get to the point where, for example, we go into a classroom and the teacher says, here's the lesson that we're going to do today, and then talks to all the assistants that we have. Okay, everybody's assistant, here are the rules. This is what the student can look up, and this is what they can't, and then the assistant guardrails that, because it's already smart enough to do that, right? If you ask it to teach you from a learning perspective, it will retract some of its capabilities and augment some of its other capabilities. What would be required is a framework to make that happen, which potentially is tech companies being on board, or school systems being on board, or federal regulations being put in place. But that, you can sort of already do that today. If you want to say, here's what I'm trying to do, here are the rules of the road, now let's go and do that thing, then that is probably that's the set of guardrails that are actually going to be stronger. Until we get to that point, there's a lot of things that they were talking about that needs to be in place.
Yeah, that's interesting. The thing that makes me think of on the topic of like teaching AI literacy is that what I've heard anecdotally from folks that have worked on implementing systems like that in my work context is that if you want to teach AI literacy to a kid, the best way to do that is try to impose guardrails on a chatbot, because they will learn how to prompt engineer like really well, because they're really motivated to just like jailbreak the access. But yeah, love those answers. The kind of like coup de grace before we go take it over to questions is all this sounds really great, and the reason you guys came to me to do this panel was because you had seen some of the like content and discussions coming out of the previous sessions, but we're specifically interested in public education sector. So we have a lot of good, well-identified problem statements, some like positive like practices to like implement. But on the public side, there's also other challenges like legislative, regulatory, etc. Now, instead of speaking to students or teachers like in the previous questions, if you're speaking to administrators, people doing the change management, what would you recommend in order to actually take the stuff that you've answered in the previous questions and begin putting it into practice in their districts?
I will not be political, I will not be political, I will not be political. It's so challenging because I would answer, and I'm going to ask you a question back. Would you rather have the conversation focus on school leadership at like the school system level, or school leadership at the like state agency level? Because those are two different conversations.
Actually, I think that's a very interesting point that you've identified, given that I don't come from like a public sector background. And I think actually it's totally valid to take the question to mean what is the level of interjection that we suspect to be most effective and why? Yeah.
Well, that being the case, I think starting at the school system level is an area where we can have the most influence. I always like work with educators and say, this is your circle of concern, this is your circle of influence, like taking it all the way back to Stephen Covey back in the day, right? And you can have influence in these areas. What does that look like? I think school leadership teams have to have the hard conversations and become more aware of the way in which the world is moving, and focus in on, if you look at any school system, their mission statement on the front page of the website says we are preparing future-ready students, or some variation thereof. And if that hasn't been reconsidered or leveled since 2021, we have a problem that needs to be addressed, because preparing students for their future has changed drastically in the last 4 years. And so getting districts to come to terms with the fact that that's not maybe someday and it's not optional, it's here. So starting with some of the research on the jobs reports. Project Tomorrow, I believe it is, has some fascinating charts about how the workforce demands and the workforce readiness is already changing and needs to. And so when I'm working with school district leadership teams, a lot of times I start with that, because if we say we're trying to help kids be future ready, then let's look at what the future ready research is telling us. And then, kind of to your point, backward mapping, if that's the end, like kids are ready for fields such as these, then what does that mean for the things that are within my sphere of influence, right? I have the state mandated curriculum, but I also get a degree of latitude about where I place my emphasis and what kinds of assignments that I give to students and what kinds of communication I do with the community to help the community understand that AI isn't going away. I feel like that's an often overlooked part of AI literacy, is talking with kids' parents about the reason for the change, because a lot of times some of the biggest inertia in school district change management comes from parents who were like, it wasn't like that when I was in school. Well, this is not 1985, right? So, I don't know, I could talk for days on that, but I think it has to start with a district commitment to beginning with the end in mind and recalibrating the entire system around that and figuring out what does that mean for professional development, what does that mean for curriculum usage, what does that mean for the subscriptions that we purchase for the district that allow us access to, Google for Education or whatever it is.
I love that. Yeah. Yes, what she said. I think what keeps me up at night is this feeling of public education right now is at the brink, right? We have a lot of school districts here in Texas who are closing schools and consolidating. We've lost kids. They're not going. We've lost enrollment, which means not only are we losing our amazing learners, but we're losing money. We're losing federal funds to provide those educational experiences to those kids that we still serve. We don't have a replacement for public education. There is nothing waiting in the shadows to come and say, we're better. We have all of the problems solved. We're going to serve all the kids by their zip code, and every child in our country will have their free, appropriate public education. Right? There is nothing there other than what we've got. And so where I see this is everything that you said, Dr. Newell, but I also see a big opportunity, because now we have the urgency and the push to make change happen a little bit faster than it has previously in public education, right? And that's traditional, and that's also charter public schools. So we need to be learning from all of the new and novel things that are happening, like Alpha School, right? And we need to be seeing what can we do to bring all of those really cool things to all of our students equitably across our country.
I don't know if I can follow it. That's a really great answer. Both of those answers are really great. And true to form, I'm going to jump in there anyway and say stuff. I think as we try to take action, often action that isn't coordinated leads to a fragmented approach. I feel that's where we are today, right? Because foundationally, the problem is how we define the purpose of education as a country, what it means, and then how we fund that. And like the contrast that I think about, so I was in India a few years ago, and as you drive down the road in India, there's billboard after billboard for all of these local universities for kids to go to. It's in your face all the time, and families don't have anything over there. Like family of 4 living on the street and a 10. Kids are begging for a pencil just to go to school because that's their avenue out. And I came across a billboard that said, the new millennium is India's and our children will lead it. Because that would get them out. I was in a little tiny town called Tirumala that nobody goes to. It's only dirt roads. You have to go up a mountain. And I saw a sign stapled to a tree that said, Java and .NET developers needed. That blew me away. They're looking for coders in a little tiny, dirt road town. That's how focused they are. I think that's for us to move forward with anything, I think the first thing is for there to be some consensus around the importance of education, and that's definitely not us in the room. I think it's our leaders as a country. That the way forward and the way out, the way forward for most of us and the way out for a lot of us as well is education. People who come to this country, they work their tails off so that their kids can have something better. You know, you gotta go to school, you gotta make good grades, etc., because we don't want you to live like we live, except that's not kind of what the priority is. Right, I think so. I think that there's more. So I think like what you said is certainly the crux of how to start solving that problem and where things sit. I think it's going to take a sea change for us to move forward in a coordinated way, but I also think that barring that happening, we need to think globally, act locally, right? We have schools, we have kids, you have parent-teacher associations, they're already aware of AI and how it can be used, what sort of programs either in the school or after school that you can set up to start accelerating outcomes, whether it's part of the official curriculum or not. I think that there's a lot of grassroots things that need to happen that so at least in our community we can be prepared and hopefully drive a larger change, you know, maybe grassroots pushing up. There, to what Laura said, you know, there's a price to inaction. At this point we have to act.
Awesome, very good answers. I do see also some very good burning questions in some people's eyes in the audience, so we're going to open it up for Q&A. How we'll do that is if you all raise your hand, I'll bring a mic over to you to ask your question. Could be to all three panelists or a specific, like double click on a specific topic that one of them was talking about. But yeah, let's open that up. All right, I see two. I'll go from right to left.
Hey, how's it going? So I've heard a lot about the literacy and how important it is. And I noticed that AI is more logic-based. So my question to you is, how important is the literacy, and I guess more or less creative literacy? And I feel like there needs to be a good combination between how creative the individual is, mixing it with logic based behind AI.
I feel like I just telepathed that question to you because one of the things I was sitting here wishing I had had a chance to talk about is something that I'm building into a keynote for next month. And it's still in draft in my head, but it's basically, it's kind of a play on words where I talk about smart, meaning like the AI logic, heart, and art. It's a little cheesy, but I mean, now that technology can pretty much do anything, it is like all that in a bag of chips. What's left for us? What makes us unique? What is the heart of a person in terms of their creativity, and what is still left for us to do that a computer can't do? And I think if we only talk about AI in education from a, like, what kind of output we can manipulate an AI tool to give us, we're missing out on something that makes human life worth living. I've thought about that. Part of the reason that this came up and I wanted to do a keynote around it is I was at a concert. James Taylor fans out there? I'm old, right? So, and I remember Brene Brown's term collective effervescence, which I think she borrowed from some other super smart researcher. But I was like, there's no AI tool in the world that can replicate the contagious, wonderful, happy feeling I get when I'm in a live music situation, right? And so what role does AI play in creating experiences that make us more human and help us feel connected to each other? And so I don't have an answer for that, but my answer is we can't not think about that.
Great. The Q&A is also the one section where I allow myself to interject a little bit more than during the panel itself. The thing that your question made me think of is sometimes people say, like in art school, you come in, you already know how to do you're painting a craft, whatever, well, and art school is actually teaching like taste, which is kind of the other side of like creativity. And there's actually a really good place to like look into people's thinking around this on AI. The shelling point is actually an individual, which is Mark Rubin, or Rick Rubin, I should say, because he famously has helped produce so many hit records, but he doesn't play any instruments. He is actually providing the taste side of the equation rather than the generation side of the equation. And so his work and his description of how he's done his work in the music industry has become an analogy often used in people working with generative AI to like talk about the problem that you're describing, where you need to have like high taste trained, because that's kind of like the last like value add that like humans have to the system. In fact, like the people that I know working at Foundation labs right now, a lot of the annotation is all about like getting high taste like annotators in like various fields to like provide that expertise and help train the model. We had another question on this side.
Hey guys, thanks so much. Glad to be here. It was a great talk so far. I have two girls. They were at Alpha, and I've gone to work for GT School, which is a gifted version of that. I'm very pro AI and so on. My 9-year-old was on ChatGPT before I'd ever used it. Like by about over a year, and we still check her logs sometimes. You know, the other day she was telling ChatGPT to quit giving her fake kindergarten answers to things, and it kept pandering, and she wrote to it, "You're the worst model." And people say, "Oh, how can you give your 9-year-old, ChatGPT?" And I'm like, well, whose 9-year-old do you think is going to get ChatGPT psychosis? The one who's telling it off, or the one? Anyway, that's all to say. I'm generally very, very pro, but I am also sympathetic to the view, especially as Alpha goes in all the headlines and stuff, and people sense somewhat correctly that there's some move to like gain political support at a high level, and Texas is voucherizing, all these things, for it to enter the public school system in some fashion. I'm very, very sympathetic to the view, actually, that AI in education done poorly may be worse than none. Just to say, no agreement on the ends of education is forthcoming, no coherent leadership at a high level is forthcoming, and we've seen what other trends in education have done. Like, if you focus on good taste or higher order thinking, what that often means in practice is that it's cover for not much of anything happening. And you say, oh, their test scores are bad, but they have great taste. So I was sort of wondering, I flip-flop back and forth on this. Part of me thinks that like maybe the right education revolution would be like, if you could just teach them to read and like do up to 4th grade math, and that was it. Like, I'd take it, and you're gonna lose your opportunity to prompt engineer at a young age and so on, but like, it would be okay to work with that, Is some that's bad worse than none?
Anybody in Texas or who've been here for a long time remember the STAR test? Is that what it's called? Yeah. We still do that? Oh man. So I remember reading an article. So students weren't doing well. Texas needed to implement something. Texas loves stars and stripes, so they created the STAR test. And kids started doing great on the test. Whole curriculum. So everybody knows where this is going, right? When a child would graduate and then try to take like a college entry exam or something like that, even though our test scores now are like astronomical, they got decimated because their educational journey was about teaching to the test. To your point, education got worse because we had the wrong goal. The same thing can be true of AI with the same outcome. You just, whichever state or whichever school or whichever, district isn't thinking about how to get to a good point in terms of education and the way to get there, then you'll end up with people who are undereducated. You're taking away their opportunity. There's going to be bad outcomes. There's any number of schools across the country that are already in that boat because of lack of teachers, lack of funding, lack of schools, lack of curriculum, lack of AI. It's just going to be the perpetuation of the same. I think AI levels the playing field, and what really breaks my heart about thinking about it being used poorly is because it is as easy to use it well as it is to use it poorly. And the fact that it wouldn't be used well is just a misperception or misaim in focus. It's not like other things where you have to print a whole new book or curriculum or something like that. It's very easy to have a great outcome. And when there's not a great outcome, it's because something simple was missed.
I'm going to come at this from a little bit of a different angle. So, I was raised in public schools. I was a military brat, well, Army brat. We lived in Germany. I went to DOD, Department of Defense Education Agency schools. My daughters were raised in public school. I went to a public university to get my master's degree. I've taught in public education my entire career, and it's easy to paint with a broad brush the negatives. And those stories that are heartbreaking, they come up to the surface. And what you end up not seeing is the amazing innovation and really cool opportunities that our kids get through public school. That I'm going to reiterate, they don't get it anywhere else, and there is no replacement for it. Okay? My daughters went through Plano ISD public schools. Yes, I was a teacher, so all my friends taught my kids, right? I was kind of lucky that way. They had opportunities that I never had, okay? And we didn't go to the wealthy schools on that side. We were in the Title I schools. They had great friends. They had great learning experiences. They had fantastic teachers, and they had access to really great resources, okay? They had the ability, so my oldest daughter went through the medical academy in high school, and she came out of school not only with her EMT license, but on her way, she had 2 years of college credit when she started university, and she's now on her way to being a doctor. Her education was stellar. My younger daughter, well, free spirit, went through the culinary academy, okay? She learned that making 400 cupcakes was not the thing she wanted to do for the rest of her life. It was the best learning experience, right? I cannot thank enough public education for what it's done for my kids. And here's who I trust. I trust teachers. I do. I've trusted them all my life. Not only did they help raise me, they helped raise my kids. And I trust principals at the campuses that the kids go to. Okay? And I think that we can't let that go. Because our kids, like I said, our kids are already walking into school understanding more about AI than their teachers. They could teach us. They did teach me. I'm forever grateful for knowing about Discord. You know, I am, because now I'm a cool teacher. But, so I understand where you're going, right? And I do believe that kids need choice, and families need choice. But I still really hold true to the fact that our public education system is a foundation in our country that we simply cannot lose. And therefore, the fight to do this correctly is one that we need to fight. You know, we need to fight for it.
I needed to sit next to you tonight because I needed a dose of that inspiration, so thank you. And I think part of the reason I am a little crusty is because a lot of the work I do now is related to the systems that surround and build the infrastructure for education that are broken, and we get the good outcomes out of public ed in spite of the systems, not as a result of it. I would say more often than not. And so I thank you for highlighting and spotlighting all of the Herculean accomplishments. Honestly, I would take a graduate of 2024 in terms of their K-12 experiences and the curriculum that they've been through over a graduate of 1990 any day of the week in terms of the skill sets and their readiness for career. And I have my crustiness of kind of worry and cynicism related to all of the the making of political gamesmanship, if you will, related to public education. And that's the thing that worries me about the viability of it into the future. And I'm glad to hear you remind us all about the fact that there's not a backup plan. In a democracy, there's not a backup plan for not having a public school system, especially given some of the worldwide travel that you referred to earlier and that I've done as well. That is one of the things that sets us apart. And if we can get it right, and this is a golden crisis not to waste, that might give us a better shot at that, then whatever winning looks like.
All right, thank you, Dr. Newell. We have next question.
Thanks. Maybe just continuing on that, in an earlier question, you were talking about the latitude that the districts have for implementing AI. Because I don't work in that part of education, I'm really curious to understand how much latitude do they have? What sort of successful implementations have you seen currently? Like you could go to the superintendent and wave a magic wand and say, this is what you need? Like, can they do, without change at the state level, without change at the national level, like what can they actually do right now?
That's a great question. I'm going to answer it and get in the weeds just a little bit with regard to state curriculum. So the Texas Essential Knowledge and Skills are the state curriculum that's mandated to every grade, every subject. There's actually technology applications texts. They're affectionately referred to as tech apps texts. Say that 5 times fast. They generally, a state curriculum at any subject is revised about once every 10 years. It's a pretty political process that has to be approved by the State Board of Education, multiple rounds of review, etc. The reason I tell you that is the tech apps texts were just revised about 2 years ago and just went into effect last year. The process for revising that state curriculum, which the tech apps texts run K-12, it's about a 3-year development cycle prior to approval. So you see where I'm going with this. The word artificial is not in the tech apps text once. If you do a file find for artificial intelligence or AI, there's not a single reference to it in the new state curriculum. However, if you plug it into AI and say, find references to AI-related thinking in this technology document, you'll see a lot. The reason I tell you that, because your question was related to latitude, it's all in the way in which we interpret and drill into what the state mandates are, right? There are some school districts that are taking the process standards, because there's content and process standards for state curriculum and social studies, for let's just use as an example. The content is like, what year was George Washington president? The process standards was more related to something like, describe the impact that George Washington had on the formation of the United States. Okay, so there's a lot of types of standards that really are more critical thinking in nature. So that's kind of a granular look at what can happen at the classroom level that is up to negotiation. So if I had to give kind of a short course in what is variable and what's not, the state board hands down policy that is aligned with the Texas Education Code that is codified by the Texas legislature. And there are certain things related to the type of textbooks you can use, the type of funding mechanisms you have to have in place, the type of student-teacher ratios, the qualifications for teachers. A lot of that is set into policy that is not negotiable. But with a district's allocated funds, they can choose to purchase Google for Education, Google Workspace for Education, as a priority over maybe some written textbook resources because they think they can get the same sort of thing in that online place that is maybe more meaningful and more adaptable to students, that they have total discretion to a certain extent over that. They have discretion over the pacing and the sequence of what happens within a classroom, in a grade, in a subject. They have discretion over the type of training that teachers have once they're employed by the district as a certified or quasi-certified teacher. So there is room for focus on that, but again, it can get lost in a sea of urgency that has nothing to do with AI and future-ready skills.
Seen good implementation?
I have seen good implementations. I have seen more comprehensive implementations outside of Texas, but I have seen some good implementations inside Texas, and I'm going to try to stay agnostic so as not to pick on a particular school district, but I'm thinking of one right now that's in the San Antonio area, and they've been very forward-thinking. They had a curriculum director and an instructional technology team that started working together like December of 2022 when they saw this come out, and they immediately started building a set of resources that were vetted by their internal teams and started providing professional development that was optional for teachers, and now they're way ahead of the game in terms of what's happening in the classroom. Now I will say that that same district just had massive budget cuts, and most of the people who helped build that initiative their positions were cut, and now they're back in the classroom. Still impacting students, but not at a systems level. So it ebbs and flows, but there are definitely places where good people are doing good work.
Awesome, thank you. Thank you to all three of our panelists. We have the room here. They kick us out at 9, but we will be able to come and talk amongst yourselves, panelists. If the conversation is rife and continuing, our overflow location at 9 is what we'll pack up here. And last month we head over to the Carolyn Bar around the corner if people want to continue discussions afterwards. But thank you guys. Give a round of applause. And we hope to see you next month as well.
Wait. We have to
Yes.
say thank
Okay.
you to you.
Oh, yeah.
Thank you for this opportunity and for the discussion.
Yeah, of course.